Welcome to Everything is Learning, a space for curiosity, growth, and figuring things out as we go. We're glad you're here. Let's get into it.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Listeners, today we are having on our show Nathan Emery, who is a writer, parent, and advocate for raising humans beyond restrictive gender expectations. Through their work on and online presence, Nathan explores what it means to parent with intention, compassion, and curiosity in a world still deeply shaped by binaries and outdated social norms. Their messaging challenges the idea that identity, expression, emotion, toys, clothing, or even futures should be predetermined by gender. In this episode of Everything is Learning, Nathan joins us for a conversation about gender-expansive parenting, raising emotionally healthy children, and how families can begin unlearning the systems that limit both children and adults. Together, we're excited to explore the tension between knowing that gender stereotypes are socially constructed, while also acknowledging the very real harm being done to women, children, and LGBTQIA+ communities around the world today. This conversation isn't about perfection or parenting trends. It's going to be asking bigger questions. What happens when we stop raising boys and girls and start raising humans? And how do we build a future where authenticity, safety, and humanity matter more than outdated expectations? Nathan, thanks so much. We're excited to learn from you today and appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here as well. I think this work is so important, and I feel like our generation of parents cares so much about doing better. So I'm excited to be part of that conversation, and I think it's great that you guys are always pushing the boundaries on that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Well, I'm going to start with the icebreaker question, and this might seem silly, but what's something about being non-binary that feels incredibly ordinary to you now, but probably sounds revolutionary to other people?
The first thing that comes to mind with that question is just clothing and what I wear. When I think about like when I go into a store now or when I'm shopping and you see that there's these men's and women's labels most of the time, like right now I just kind of realize all of those clothes are just fabrics, and usually there's different colors and shapes and stuff, but like you can literally go in and wear whatever you want. And so for me, it's very comfortable to shop in any section of the store. But I know earlier on, before like I had fully figured out my identity, I always just like went to the men's section and that's where I stayed. And then I was like, oh, can just like go shop wherever we want. It doesn't really matter at all. But the first few times like going and shopping in the women's section was definitely scary. So I think it's something that's normal now, but a few years ago would have been scary for me.
I appreciate that. You talked about how when you think about other people who express as non-binary, that they dress androgynously and often wear baggy clothes and all of that, but you wear what feels comfortable. And that really spoke to me because I feel, and Lane, I'd be curious your take too. When we were growing up, we frequently joke and have even in past episodes talked about how as younger versions of ourselves, it would have been difficult to determine our gender just by looking at us, both based on a haircut and what we were wearing. I love our parents, but I don't necessarily know if styling young female identifying children was their forte.
It was not at all. Our dad wanted 3 boys, and our mom, we literally submitted her for what not to wear 10 to 15 times in our teenage years.
But it felt okay for us if we ever were to go into a boys or even a men's section, especially at like thrift stores. But I never really posited until thinking about the fact that we would be talking with you, how it might feel like. I don't think it ever crossed my husband's mind to ever go into a girl section if he liked something in a girl. And we have young, not only my niece and nephews, but even cousins who dressed a boy identifying child dressed as Elsa for Halloween. And my cousin was so welcoming of that. They all dressed up as other Frozen characters. And I think now I very much appreciate there's people like Jazz and you and talking through that. And I'm like, wow, I wonder what it never occurred to me to be worried about it because I was wearing boy clothes anyway. But like, right. I have a different appreciation now. And instead of worrying about the gender, I'm really more worried about a good deal because with gas prices the way they are, I got to save money where I can save money.
Right.
So, and not for nothing, a lot of times women's fashion is marked up. So
Way more
I could get
expensive.
something similar for a lot less money at like a clearance section in a men's area of a mall, a department store, what have you. So lots of times I just try and save money that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally feel that. I feel like I think it's great that like I think the younger generation is more accepting about this stuff. I think when I was growing up and like where I grew up in like a relatively rural part of New Jersey, even just like caring about clothes among other boys was like something that was frowned upon. So like, you know, you were just expected to kind of put on whatever and like usually it was just athletic clothes and that was acceptable, but caring about clothes or wearing like, you know, skinny jeans was kind of like the trend back then was like all just looked upon negatively. So I think everybody comes in with their own journey and like lived experiences that color what they have to deconstruct. But for me, deconstructing those like negative associations around femininity and like androgyny was a big part of my early journey for sure.
I
You just
appreciate
used the
that.
word femininity and androgyny, and I think when people talk about those things when it comes to the LGBTQIAs plus community, they think it's the same. In
Yeah.
your mind, how is it different?
I think the way I think about androgyny is like either um sort of ambiguous. So when people look at you, they don't have a notion of whether you're like going for a more masculine or a more feminine look, or kind of like going against the way that you would typically be perceived. So, like, you know, I was born male, I have a lot of masculine features. And so for me, like androgyny typically means leaning more feminine. And so usually it's like, doing something that leans away from the gender that a lot of people would assume you to be based on looking at you, but not like fully trying to pass as kind of the opposite binary gender.
That's a great explanation. It feels really easy and accessible, and everything that you share feels very easy to comprehend and accept. And I'm sure part of it is because I'm open to it and I want to learn from you. But I think the other part of it is you really encourage, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, but the way that you talk and the way that you present yourself is so peaceful. It's almost like a meditative state when I listen to your voice that I go into. And that helps so much with being able to process, being able to like move more slowly and move more intentionally. And that was what really drew me to your content was I can listen to this. This is easy for me to understand. This doesn't feel like something that I have to really challenge. It feels more like something I can be curious
Agreed.
about. And that welcoming nature that you bring to your content and just it seems like who you are is really lovely to be able to come into a space where I'm learning a lot and I come from a different type of background or maybe it's not different, maybe it's more like societally influenced background. So you're creating this space for me and so many others to say, here's the door. You can come in if you'd like. And I really love that about everything that you do. And it
For
makes me
sure.
curious about what your childhood upbringing was like. I know you said rural New Jersey. So how did societal norms play into your upbringing? You talked about skinny jeans, but what else did that look like?
Yeah, definitely. I think my upbringing was unique and had like a lot of influences on my journey, both like my ability to accept myself and also why it took me until my 20s to figure out that I was non-binary and like find that part of myself. So I grew up in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. I was homeschooled all the way up until college. So in a way, and I was homeschooled to pretty accepting parents. A lot of my friends were homeschooled for like religious reasons or to be kind of more on the conservative side. And that wasn't my parents. They just were really passionate about education and experiences. So, in a sense, like when I was home, it was pretty judgment free, which gave me a lot of opportunity to explore myself and who I was. You mentioned like looking back on pictures of you both that, it'd be hard to tell what kind of gender you identified as. And it was the same for me. Like I played with My Little Pony toys. My mom would paint my nails when she was painting her nails, and I asked her to. I remember like this pair of big pink flower clip-on earrings I used to wear, like just a lot of jewelry and things like that. And I never felt any judgment about it from my parents. And it wasn't until like I got older and kind of into like the preteen years and was friends with a lot of boys that I started to realize like those things weren't things that were, accepted by other boys. And kind of started to assimilate. So my early childhood was like very free to explore myself. And I didn't really think a lot about gender or labels. I just kind of was who I was. But then as I got older and like started to understand these social norms and like growing up around mostly boys, I played a lot of basketball. And so just like boys who were into athletics. It gave me a lot of real world experience of like how that sort of femininity was viewed. And most of it wasn't like explicit bullying, but it was more like it was super clear what was cool. And what was cool was like Halo and Call of Duty and like, those types of things. And not like My Little Pony, right? So
Don't let anyone fool you. My kids love the My Little Pony. Everything
yeah.
from the 90s is like making a resurgence.
That's
Yes,
what I'm kind of gathering.
thank God.
I
That
know.
makes a lot of sense.
I was watching Trolls the other day. The trolls of today are a lot cuter than the trolls of our youth.
Our past.
Yeah, right. But you mentioned about sports, and I, in thinking about this conversation, one of the questions that I had been driving through my mind was about what societal norms would dismantle if gender didn't play a role, and I immediately went to sports.
Mm.
And I'm recently, mostly because of the current administration, into rage baiting men. And one of the things is now because we have the NBA and then we have the WNBA. So now I call it the MNBA. Or the PGA and the LPGA. So now I call it the DPGA for Dude PGA, right? Like, and so when I have to be intentional about it, like I have to think ahead of time. But I want my children to realize like it's basketball. Anybody can play it. Yes,
Yeah.
women play against women in this league and men play against men in this league, but like if the same rules apply, I don't think that there should be a gender assigned to it. And I recognize that like softball versus baseball, but they call it a totally different name. That seems fair, right? So if there's something different about the aspect of the sport that you play, whether rules or timing or distance or right, okay, make a distinction. But otherwise, we're playing by the same thing. And when I don't know why as youth it's more appropriate to be co-ed, but like when we first got into basketball, I'm curious about yours. When you first started, it was boys and girls. Any kid could play, and it didn't matter. And then once you got to middle school, then there was a distinction. And I get puberty plays a role in that, but I think that that's more because society put it on this. I still don't think at that age I would have realized much about why the pressure was there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, totally agree. Now that you mention it, like all the way up until middle school, all the sports I played were co-ed. I played basketball, I played soccer, and then I played softball. And all were like we were totally fine, whoever wanted to play, and then something happens as you get older. But yeah, I mean, the sports conversation is an interesting one because I totally agree. Like people kind of prop it up as this one issue to point to whenever the question around trans people just like existing, living their lives comes up. Um, And I think it's a convenient sort of political argument,
Mm,
and ultimately is just rooted in misogyny. I think
mm.
from like the perspective of spending time with a lot of men, it's just that they are misogynistic toward women. They kind of look down on like women's sports leagues as somehow like less skilled or less entertaining or what have you. And so I think that's the root of the argument. But to me, it's like when people talk about, trans people having different physical abilities, for example. In reality, that's just such a non-issue. First, when people, transition, their physical abilities change in whatever direction they're transitioning, if they're, medically transitioning. And second is like, to me, when I think about it, it's like an NBA player in high school would have been miles ahead of anybody else. Like, and we're worried about trans people, but what about like LeBron when he was playing normal people on a high school team? Like, there are all of these people who are totally, genetically gifted or physically gifted that we don't think twice about. And then we're worried about like where trans people are going to play sports. And
For sure.
Right.
Sha'Carri Richardson, I'm sure when she was playing track, probably could have beaten any male track
yeah,
person
exactly.
in her
You know
class,
what I
right?
don't get
Except say for
either?
Usain Bolt, maybe.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
sorry.
know
Go
what I
ahead,
don't
Lee.
get though? Okay, so all three of us were athletes, right? Um, like really talented athletes. I'm just gonna throw out there. Let's pretend that's what happened.
That
So
was false, but that's
would you?
generous.
We'll talk about that in another episode, Marissa. But um, so we've all played several sports, and what I want to ask you is, would you care if you played with the opposite gender?
Me, no.
And you know, and that's the thing. I think athletes who love the sport could care less.
Mm,
And the ones who do care, I really think it's fear-based. And I
mm.
feel very strongly about this because when we were growing up and we played sports, we always wanted to play against the boys so we could get better. That's what our male coaches told us, right?
For
But the
sure.
reality is,
Yeah, we would
I
scrimmage
want to.
against them.
What was
As
that?
that we would scrimmage against them as if
Yeah,
that was going to leverage some kind of unhidden, untapped talent.
right.
Make
But
us
the other
instantly
thing
better.
too is females get taller quicker. So
Oh, yeah.
there were a lot of times, Marissa, when you played forward, and I'm thinking of 20 boys from your class
That's
who
true.
could not block you.
There
And
was
that's what I'm
one
talking
other
about.
boy and then it was me, and then there were a few other girls that were tall, but they would line us up by height, and I was for a long time one of the tallest in my class.
But if it doesn't matter to us when we're younger, the only people who put that on us are the adults in the situation.
It's true.
And there are so many professional athletes who, if they went up against, and I'm talking from the female perspective, against men and went into, we've been talking about WNBA, NBA, it went into the NBA, they would be wiping the
You mean
floor.
the MNBA? But
Yeah,
you're right.
the MNBA. You know what I mean? So, like,
We went down the sports rabbit hole, but that's not even the only system that would get dismantled if we stopped gendering things. And I'd be curious to know, we briefly talked about it right before we got on the recording, but I'm curious to know, where else do you see things would have played out differently had we not assigned genders to things?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about like just work and the family would definitely break down in a positive way. As I've like gotten older, and our generation tends to be like more equal on how different genders have different roles within family and parenting and working. But you realize like so many, especially women in earlier generations, were just like the homemakers, and oftentimes were trapped in marriages that like weren't great for them, but they had no financial runway to get out of it. So I think everybody having the freedom to like pursue careers, which in many ways like people do nowadays, but is still not fully equal, would mean that like families choose each other based just on liking each other and not like financial needs or social needs. And I think more people would just like be free to be in happier relationships and families. More people would get to like do the things that they like to do, and not feel pressured to like take on a certain role. So I think family systems would break down, but hopefully in a positive way. Um, I mean, I think you mentioned before we got on that the government would break down. I think we've seen, evidence in smaller scales that like matriarchal societies run a lot better for everybody because patriarchy is like 90% of the world's problems. And I think
Mm.
if we had like this, gender agnostic society where the patriarchy somehow didn't exist, think the government would care a lot more about people instead of power and like individuals within the government would. Um,
And that
and
isn't to, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but along that vein, that isn't to say that there aren't men who would champion women or people who wouldn't champion other people. A great example of this, Zoran Mamdani and what he's doing in New York City. I think he
yeah,
would thrive in a matriarchy. But either way, I hear you on that point. Yes, please continue.
yeah, no, I mean, I think it's what I was gonna kind of finish with is it's like almost every part of society is in some way influenced by these gender roles.
Yeah.
And like the 1% of people who are wealthy and like kind of perpetuate a lot of the power imbalances in society also tend to be very like patriarchal. And there's just so much that is intertwined between power and money and gender that breaking down gender would be one of the cracks in the foundation that I think would make life like freer and easier for everybody. Probably in ways that are hard to imagine right now.
That is mind-blowing to, like, sit down and really connect everything that you said, like, as fluently as you did.
For real. It reminded me of our discussion with Tana earlier this season, where
Mm.
she speaks very highly about the mental load and that chores do not have a gender. So everything you were talking about related to family really kind of tied me back to that episode too, and it resonates highly. And I think I appreciate going back to something that Elaine had said earlier. When you post your content, you don't post from a place of hurt or anger. At least that's not what it sounds like to those
Mm-mm.
who are watching and listening. It's from for us, what makes it safe is not only our curiosity, but the fact that you talk about it as though it's just something that you do and it just is who you are. It's like part of your day to day, which it is. But I mean, not everyone can convey that. Most times when people post, it's out of a qualm or a hurt or an anger or a regret. And so the fact that you're just giving us a glimpse into your life makes it a lot easier to listen to, absorb, and accept because it's
Mm.
accessible.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that definitely.
And so I would like to know your take on how people navigate if gender doesn't matter when laws and systems are actively targeting people because of their gender and identity. What would you say to those people?
Yeah. I think in like some ways gender doesn't matter in that we're all people who are free to be like whoever we are. And in an ideal world, when we look at somebody, we wouldn't make any assumptions about people. But gender is also very real in that there's all these socially constructed expectations of what gender is and what's kind of acceptable depending on what gender you're perceived to be, that have a real influence on your life. So to me, it's like acknowledging that reality and knowing that, like, whatever your gender identity is, however you choose to present and act and show up in the world, is going to have consequences based off
Mhm.
of other people's perceptions. But you're also free to like exist within your own body and your own life as you want to. So just like understanding that what those consequences are, I think is important. And something that I think, like, I know we're very far away from this, but I think it would be great if we all just had like a gender studies required class at some point in education. Because I don't think most people have to really confront like this sort of social construct of gender and are just like comfortable aligning with how they're born,
Mm.
and the assumptions around that. And gender really does affect everybody. Like what I talked about earlier, where boys kind of bully other boys for being feminine or, what have you, and like expectations around clothing, but also the ways that patriarchy like pushes women down and they have to work harder to earn the same things that men receive. Like all those different pieces are part of gender and like these gendered expectations. So I think if everybody or as many people as possible could get this idea of like gender is just a social construct, you don't have to follow it unless you actually want to. Um, we would all realize like we can be more ourselves. But yeah, I think it's just like acknowledging that that reality exists. And then if you choose to go against it, there will be consequences, unfortunately. But that is like something you can live with if you're comfortable with it, as long as you're happy with who you are and, where you are.
Also, anything someone else chooses, like, nothing that you're doing impacts me in any way. It just so happens that Elena happened to see your content and she was like, "Hey, check out this person." And I loved your content as well, especially because of the things that I can resonate, which I know I had told you earlier about what weekends are precious. My husband and I work opposite shifts. Um, we both work from home. Things to that nature. And so there's a piece of what you share that can resonate with anyone, and that's what I appreciate. And Lane, to your point about earlier about um like how everything has come across, and that things that have shifted and are more accepting, like, I appreciate that people have to, like you had said, would you even care if the other gender participated in X, Y, or Z? And I'm curious about, how does that show up in your life, Lane? Like, with when while you're raising humans, you had maybe touched on it previously, and I'm wondering if you would mind talking about it further.
Well, honestly, um, and Nathan, I feel like you've kind of talked about this a bit too, but like becoming a parent or being responsible for other people is this really enlightening experience where you start learning even more about yourself. And the first time that I really thought about gender, honestly, was my second or third year of teaching. And I had 5th and 6th graders, and a boy came up to me and asked if they could read this book called The Princess in Black. And that was the first time where I was like, yes, because books don't have gender. And but I never thought about that. I was privileged enough to have never had to think about that. Right? Like when we were growing up, our dad always bought us boys basketball shoes because they were better made and they were more comfortable. That that was just a fact of our lives. So we only ever bought boys basketball shoes. And in the
Unfortunately,
90s,
not Air Jordans. That was
no,
too
no, no, no.
a
No.
little
I
bit of
mean,
cut
we were at
above,
like the
but
shoe
we're
rack
Fila's. They
things.
gotta feel
Yeah,
like
they were always
bedroom
Fila's.
slippers, but we gotta play basketball in them.
But like, I think being white, I think in the 90s growing up, I think with a lot of people like Pink coming out and Aaliyah, they kind of were more, they showed like the ability to be feminine and masculine. So for women in the 90s, I think it was a lot easier to show up in basketball shorts and t-shirts and not have to be in dresses. And I think that gave me a privilege I didn't really realize. Um, and while it was this really interesting mix of coming home that night and being like, books don't have gender, clothes don't have gender, but I work at a women's clothing store part-time too because teachers don't make enough money. And then it was like all these different things, and I'm like, colors don't have gender and like all this different stuff. And then society started changing, so it was almost like, oh, I can talk about this more freely. Oh, interesting. And when you're in your early 20s, like Nathan, you were talking about, that's kind of when you started exploring it too. You start to realize more and more, like, this is all the Matrix. Like, this is ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
society made this stuff up for their benefit and no one else. And it makes no sense. So for me, it shows up in um, my children can wear whatever they want whenever they want. So, like, and I was telling you guys offline, like, one of my boys has long, curly, brown or blonde surfer hair. And people often mistake him for a girl because his twin is a girl. And he also loves to wear dresses. So when we're at the zoo and he might be in a masculine Mickey Mouse hat, but like a butterfly dress, it's confusing for people. And I'm just like, he put it on himself. He likes to dress himself. He's 3. So what?
Yeah.
Like,
Also, dress up was like so accepted at a young age, and then at some point it's like only for Halloween.
right, right. And I think that's ridiculous.
I
But
mean, I suppose I shouldn't have gone for Nathan for years, year on year. I used to dress up as a Grim Reaper. I suppose I probably couldn't
Same.
go around without scaring people.
And I was
but,
Batman
like,
for like 25 years. So,
but I mean, like, I thought so much of who I like or who like my kids love Bluey. I have 2 boys, but they love Bluey. I would let them dress up as Bluey and Bingo, no issue at all. Same with characters. I see at my kids' school this year, K-pop Demon Hunters was huge. There were boys dressed like Rumi, and I don't know. I seen in videos your kids are still young, so I don't know what they're necessarily liking. But even Blue from Blue's Clues, right? Blue is a girl. Bluey is a girl, right? Like I really appreciate that the younger generation is adjusting what has become. We were just talking about new colors don't really have genders, and this also brings me to a point that you've touched on in your videos, but I really like your full take on this. So there's something different between gender neutral and gender inclusive. And so I'm curious about if we're dismantling gender expectations, what meaningful gender expansive parenting looks like beyond just buying gender neutral or neutral colored things, right? It's way more encompassing than that.
Yeah, definitely. It is. And I think to your point earlier, like when you become a parent, you really are learning everything for the first time. My kids one's almost 3, one just turned 1. So I'm very much in
congrats.
the early phase. Thank you. And I think there will be a lot that like I learn about this as I get older, because like we talked about with sports, when you're younger, you don't care. And then at some point, that sort of social pressure becomes written into you. So I think I'll learn more about my philosophy on this as I continue on in parenting. But right now, the way that I think about gender inclusive parenting and not just like gender neutral, is supporting who they are and like their interests outside of gender, and just like making sure that in a sense you don't see gender or you don't create expectations around gender at home. And then also as they get older, educating them about the reality of gender, which is kind of that piece that I felt like I was missing. Where you guys talked about how once you reach young adulthood, you start to see like all the gendered walls that were put up around you. I think teaching them about that from a younger age, I know that would have been super helpful for me in understanding like how the things that I felt fit in. So teaching is one, but I think everything that you just talked about letting, boys wear dresses and supporting whatever interests they have is really important and a big piece of it. The something that definitely I've heard from older generations is like boys don't do this or girls don't do this or boys do this or girls do this or whatever it may be. And like any of those expectations are just not true. Like that's totally social conditioning. So getting rid of that completely from your home, I think is a great way to do this. And then as they get older and like society tries to put those things onto them, teaching them like, hey, this is what this really is. Like you're still free to be yourself. And like for me, I mean, I just had never heard the term non-binary or like even really met someone who was trans until probably college or later. So like
Right.
just knowing what that meant and like, hey, there's a portion of the population out there that feels like this is what being trans means and this is what being cis means would be super helpful. So definitely will try to like
Exposure
give my
for sure.
kids, yeah, like that perspective of here's what gender is, like here's kind of the full spectrum of what gender means and not just like assume that they align with their birth genders.
That
Wise words.
I love that you brought up like navigating family, especially older generations, because that I feel like is the hardest thing when it comes to raising people, like raising humans, navigating other family members or community members. Particularly for us, we were raised Catholic. So in the Catholic religion, Like, women are not even really allowed to be up on the pulpit anymore. And that was like a huge thing in our church, but it's really hard when people hold gender traditions as well as gender norms. And I find myself trying to figure out how to set boundaries with people, and trying to, like, also leave room for conversation and growth, and I feel like you seem pretty masterful at that. So how do I
Agree.
do that without, like, going from 0 to 100 and telling people to just STUF?
I wouldn't say I'm masterful at it by any means, but the thing that always helps me when it comes to boundaries is like just trying to see what my kid's perspective is going to be and like not worry about the other adult's perspective.
Mhm.
So something we've had with like some extended family, even at our age, is like, hugs and physical affection, where it's like, oh, come give me a hug, right? And then, we'll tell our daughter, oh, she doesn't have to if she doesn't want to. And like sometimes we have to communicate that to the family member too. And for me, it's like it is uncomfortable. I used to be very bad with boundaries and like speaking it because I didn't want to rock the boat. But when it comes to my kids, I'm just like, can imagine how they're seeing the situation and like seeing me. And I just like, I don't know, sort of get that confidence of I want them to see me defend them. And so that helps me to speak up about it. But I think it's hard too because like my parents are really good about boundaries and like totally kind of take feedback into account. So if it was someone who was really close to my kids, that would be a lot harder to like set those rigid boundaries because I don't care if I, offend extended family or whatever.
Mhm.
So that also makes it easier in my family.
That's
I
really I'm glad that that's the case. I
Yeah.
really am.
Yeah, I know that's, pretty uncommon. So,
and are
I
you
do
just
always feel fortunate for, like, how sort of accepting and kind of thoughtful my parents are.
That's amazing. I just, got a little bit emotional while you were talking about that because the fact that your children give you the confidence and you know that they're looking at you, um, that again, it's just this, like, calm matter of factness that you just delivered that with, and sorry, I don't mean to get emotional, but, like, it just really resonated with me because it is so matter of fact. Like, the people that I care about most are my partner and my children. And sometimes it really is just so challenging when you want to keep the peace, but you also feel like our child's autonomy is so important and letting them become who they want to become is so important. And it's hard when people don't support that. And we have supportive parents, but we are also cisgender heteronormative, like so we're privileged in that and we're white. So we can go out into society and we both have male spouses, we have husbands. So it's really easy for us to navigate the world in a lot of ways. But when I think of people, it is this at its very core. People should be able to be who they are, period. And it blows my mind as an adult to look at other people and go, fear, anger, control. It's mind blowing to me that people are so driven by those things. And it's very evident that they are very powerful because the United States has completely fallen apart because of fear and control. Um, But I guess what gives you hope for the next generation? Like, what do you see is changing around identity and parenting and raising humans right now from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it is easy to fall into those rabbit holes that, like, make you feel hopeless, where it's like the people who have all the power are the people perpetuating these divisions, and, like, we individually can't do anything, but what gives me hope is, I think, looking at other parents who are like millennials or Gen Z, who are parents and like trying to make meaningful change, and looking at younger generations. So a lot of times the people who like reach out to me directly after watching my videos, which I'm always like very honored by, are parents who are either millennials or sometimes even older and who are like, my child is trans or my child is queer. And like, I never had to navigate that before. And now I'm like trying to do my best. Like, how can I better support them? And just the fact that like there are parents out there who are looking for anything they can do to support their children, I think is a great thing and something that, um, older generations would not have done to the level that we have now. But then also looking at the younger generation, like I also have a lot of kids who watch my content and are like, I'm queer, I'm non-binary, and like, I have hope that I can live a good future or like have the family that I want or what have you. And to me, the evidence for things like that, especially within like this context of gender, is of adults in the US, it's like less than 1% identify as trans or genderqueer. And of youth, I think it's like 3%, right? So, like, there's clear evidence that despite all the noise and the news and the government and everything, our society is becoming more accepting of people being who they are. And like our youth feel free to be who they are. And it seems like there's enough parents out there really trying to make a difference that even though the other voices might be loud and the narratives might be scary, like there is change happening under the surface. And I see the signs of it, and that gives me hope that like eventually, as generation after generation moves in that direction, that will sort of transform the rest of society.
I love that. So we ask everybody, it just seems like the appropriate time to ask this because you just talked about hope. But we believe raising humans is one of the most powerful learning spaces. What lessons do you hope we start teaching more consciously and collectively around the world to make permanent and positive change?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you kind of summed it up when you said like people should be free to be who they are. But I think more specifically, like teaching, teaching about the realities of the world that keep us divided and not just taking them for granted for what they are. So teaching about the gender expectations that keep us within certain roles, teaching about like even political systems, economic systems that are designed to divide us, and bridging those gaps between like one person's experience and another person's experience through conversation, I think is really important. And having like social media, the internet, podcasts like this, like videos, everything online gives us the opportunity to do that. So I hope everyone like is able to start to see other people's experiences, empathize with those, and like understand where they're coming from instead of being stuck in their own belief systems. And even if we can, change everybody's mind a little bit in the right direction with our messages, that's, a start and that's a positive change. So, yeah, I hope we all start to kind of dismantle all of the systems that the world tries to teach us about how things are and see like what we really could be, which is just a group of humans who want to see the world be a better place, want to see people love each other better and like be able to love each other better. And I think we can do that if we just keep an open mind and keep listening and talking.
Totally
Agreed.
agree.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so
Um,
much for being here.
for sure.
Yeah.
And can you let our listeners know where they can find you?
Yeah, all of my socials are at It's Nathan Emery. I'm on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and then I also have a blog where I occasionally post about being non-binary, or other gender-related lessons or experiences I have, and that's nathanemery.me.
Thank
I
you for
missed the
that.
blog. I'm going there right when we sign off.
Not the most updated, but every now and then I sit down and kind of just
Our
spill
blog isn't
my
updated
train of
either,
thought.
but maybe we'll have to do like a blog post together because this was so insightful and we cannot
Agreed.
thank you enough for being here. Truly. Like,
Thank
thank you
you.
so, so much for coming on. Um, and I think today the best way to end is hopefully our listeners will go out and challenge themselves to think differently, not just about gender, but about how they can love someone better today or how they can hear something different today. And hopefully, we are leading lots of people to your content so that they can continue to be curious and open. Thank you again so much for being here, Nathan, and hope everybody has a great day. Stay tuned for the next episode.
Be
Bye.
well. Thanks for spending your time with us at Everything is Learning. Keep being curious, keep learning, and we look forward to catching you again next time.